hard news and being the bearer of bad news is never an easy thing, and it can be a very tricky area to navigate around. And as a healthcare professional, you have to really do this as a regular part of your job. So it's important that you develop the skills needed to be doing this in an effective, empathetic, and compassionate manner, while at the same time being completely transparent and honest. Stay tuned for the rest of this video to learn more about this concept.
Audio Jungle.
Back again with another video. I am the founder of Healthy Dynamics. We are a coaching practice that helps healthcare professionals from non-English speaking countries improve their language and communication skills in order to become better serving and working healthcare professionals, stand out in their workplace as a person of excellence, and obviously build better relationships based on trust and credibility with our patients. Now, in case you're wondering, the Collingwood game is still really strong. So while this is not strictly a Collingwood themed jersey or jumper, this is still, the colors do represent the Collingwood football team. So if you remember last week's video, I talked about how this weekend was actually, that particular weekend was actually the grand final weekend where Collingwood played against Brisbane Lions in the Aussie Rules Grand Final. Now, today is actually the actual day of the Grand Final, so and kickoff starts in a couple of hours, so I'm going to be heading down to my mother-in-law's and actually watching it with her because she also is a really big Collingwood supporter. So hopefully, by the time I film the next video, there will be some good news that Collingwood has actually won this year's premiership. But anyway, speaking about news now. So last video we spoke about how healthcare professionals have to routinely, as part of their job, deliver bad news, and why sometimes they struggle to do it. And there were numerous reasons behind it. So if you just need a little bit of a background on what this video is about, so just go and check out the last video. The link is right up here. So I'm going to now cover some of the ways in which you can effectively deliver bad news to a patient. So this is never an easy process. Let me just put that out there straight away. It's never an easy process. You feel responsible, you feel guilty, and you're always wondering, could you have done something better in order to resolve the situation? Some cases, yes, there's no doubt, but in most cases, no, it's just nature taking its course, really. But there are some ways in which you can navigate through this really challenging process in a much more effective, tactful, empathetic, compassionate, yet honest and transparent manner. So I'm just going to cover 4 main strategies that can really go a long way in helping us deliver bad news or distressing news to our patients in a more effective manner. So let's get started. Number 1, avoid starting with the phrase, "I have some bad news," or saying things like "unfortunately," or "I'm sorry to say," or "I'm afraid I have some bad news." So what happens in this scenario is that if you are the patient in this situation, yes, you want to mentally prepare them. I can see where you're going with this, but it sort of plants a seed of big negativity and bias in their head that it's all doom and gloom. And that may well be true, and you're probably trying to be truthful and transparent. And as I said, these conversations are never easy, but you can do this in a much more factual way by saying something like, you can say something quite observational. So either it's observational or diagnostic based, or just facts based as to what the patient's situation is when you're corresponding with their family members or themselves. And in the very end, you can say, "I am very sorry," or I wouldn't say you have all my sympathy. I can just say, "I'm sorry about that." You just leave it at that, because you are both apologetic that you have to deliver this bad news as much as you don't want to, but at the same time, you are a little bit empathetic about how they're feeling. Now, another big thing to avoid when you're delivering bad news is that, "I know this must be hard for you," or "I know how you feel." That kind of makes the patient believe or assume that you have actually been there before, and that's why it's giving you some credibility about where you're coming from. Now, unless you actually have real examples that you have faced in your own life or in your career, yes, it's obviously where you can give that example just to back yourself up, but otherwise this becomes a really baseless statement, and the patient might think, "Oh, you're just doing this to feel sorry for me. Instead of saying things like, I know how you feel, or, I know this must be hard for you, it's really drawing that fine line between being empathetic and being sympathetic. So you have to really respect the patient's, space and time in order for them to process, heal, and grieve from this bad loss. But also you have to assure them that there is support and help available, whether it's from yourself or any other provider. But avoid using things such as, I know how you feel, or I understand what you're going through, unless you yourself have experienced this before in your career or in your other aspect of life. A big one also is to adhere to patients' expectations of privacy and confidentiality. So obviously, working in the healthcare space, you obviously have to really adhere to this. But sometimes also, say if you're a physician, if you're say a GP and you're working not just with one person of the family, but the entire family, some people might not want to disclose their conditions to their family members at an immediate situation. So it's important that you respect their patients, and when they're ready and when they're willing to share this news, and when they want to get their family members involved, the patient really should have the say in the situation. So in that situation, as I said, just really respect and maintain your immediate patients' confidentiality and privacy, and don't involve anyone from the other family members or people who they work with or anything like that, unless it's absolutely necessary and they give you the permission to do so. In situations relating to prognosis, focus on communicating about treatments, ways in which that could improve the patient's quality of life and make them feel more comfortable, especially if the situation is terminal. So if you're, say, an oncologist or someone who works with terminally ill patients, yes, we know for a fact that they are having a terminal illness. There is no long-term cure, there is no treatment available, but you can offer suggestions and alternatives to the patient's family or the patient themselves to see how we can make their final days filled not only with joy, but also comfort and with dignity. Because at the end of the day, when it comes to death and things like that, people really want to be departing this world with dignity and peace more than anything. So what you really have to do is reduce that suffering as much as possible. Now, there is a big argument about the state where I live in, and it is true in some parts of the world, whether dying with dignity is something that people should be granted freely if they have opted to do so. That is very controversial. Some countries are really for it. Where I live in Victoria, Australia, that has really gained a lot of attention over the years, and now people are waking up to the fact that voluntary euthanasia should definitely be legalized. And in those situations, patients are really again taking their autonomy, not just about how long they want to live here, but also the kind of quality of life that they're having, and they're considering that, and also departing in a peaceful, respectful, and dignified manner. So that's a whole different conversation, and I might do a different video on it at some point, so stay tuned for that. But that's the other one. Now, be aware also of patients' triggers around the bad news and avoid reinforcing them through questions. So when you're particularly, say, working in some kind of a mental health field, so say if you're a therapist, or even if, say, you are a dietitian or a naturopath, people who generally have some sort of a problem, and when they have some kind of a bad news that has led them down, a downward spiral of a path, there is more often than not a trigger point. So there is a reason why they have got themselves into that situation. Some may be a conscious choice, but the underlying reason almost always is a series of traumatic events. So while it's important that you tell the patient that yes, you have this particular bad news, this is the condition that you're facing, it's important that you don't bring up things from the past that could trigger that particular traumatic event or the symptoms that are related to that. So that's quite important. So focus on the symptoms individually instead of the conditions overall. So for example, you can say that, say if you're someone in mental health, you can say that you have been, the patient, for example, has been diagnosed with borderline personality or PTSD or something like that. In that situation, instead of mentioning, things like, oh, you have PTSD, instead of putting a label on them and really putting them in that box, and again, bringing up past sort of events, you can just say, your symptoms and signs suggest that you may have whatever the condition is. And even if the same thing, if you're having an eating disorder or some sort of an eating problem or addiction of some sort, the same principle should be applied in my humble opinion. So in that situation, again, you're keeping it quite factual. You're saying that our tests, our diagnosis, everything it has led us to conclude that you are experiencing this. You may be experiencing this rather, instead of just saying you have whatever, right? So, and even when you're saying going through the root cause, that obviously happens in subsequent sessions when you have with your client or with your patient. But again, going back into the past events, you could have said this could happen because of childhood trauma, you had an abusive household that you grew up in. Just avoid bringing those things up again and again, because that can be very triggering and upsetting to patients. I remember when I used to work with my psychiatrist, he had a big habit of bringing this up again and again. He would make sure that I was going back in my past and reliving those past events, which I wanted no part of, and that was one of the reasons, many reasons, why I refused to work with him. Now my current therapist, who helps me with my mental health, she's really good. She sort of focuses on the present, or even if it's past, it's like the past 2 weeks, not past 2 or 3 years. So these are some of the really good and effective tips, in my opinion and from my experience, that you could really incorporate when you're working with patients in order to deliver them some kind of a distressing or bad news. So hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave your thoughts and comments in the description box below, and stay tuned for next week's video, where I'm going to be talking about transparency, honesty and openness. That's the importance of those concepts amongst healthcare professionals. So yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like, a comment, and make sure that you hit the subscribe bell and the notification bell to ensure that you're up to date with when the next video in the series is coming up, or any other series for that matter. And I will catch you guys next week. Khan the Pies. See you.